am a doctoral student here at UCLA, and the title of my presentation is Ogoni Women's Organizing. I begin with a quote from Alicia, one of my participants. She's an Ogoni woman activist and politician, and she says, "They won't know I ever existed or did anything to effect change in Ogoni." And as a fellow Ogoni woman, her concern was mine as well, and that's what's motivated this study. The site of my study is in Nigeria. It's in southern Nigeria near Port Harcourt. Ogoni is located in southern Nigeria. It's the name of a place and an ethnic group that lives there. The Ogoni narrative evolves around activism in the 1990s. The Ogoni have been presented as an indigenous ethnic group in Nigeria that began the movement for the survival of Ogoni people, one of the largest pro-democracy movements at the time. It was led by Kinsarawiwa to reclaim political power over their land and people. The Ogoni struggle presented a critical opportunity for Ogoni people to speak against the oppression that they had long endured. It also gained international attention, especially from the U.S., who had, I think, over 40% invested in the Nigerian oil economy. Congress had held joint sessions, especially after the murder of the leader, Kinsarawiwa, to figure out what their stance would be on Ogoni and Nigeria. The lesser known story is that of women who participated in Moso, which is part of the focus of my study. More broadly, I'm interested in reasons why women have not appeared in the narrative of this social movement, and hopefully it will inform what we think about other social movements. I argue that the tendency to relegate African women to a local sphere has contributed to their elimination from the narrative. My research questions are, in what spaces do women organize in Ogoni? For what issues do they organize, and to what extent are they satisfied with the organizations that they are part of? The literature, from what I understood of it, has to do with, you have organizations who are subjecting African women to a local level, and then there are organizations that are trying to move them from the local into the global. But there are many names here. CEDAW, for instance, you have the Nigerian gender policy that says we want to help remove attitudinal and cultural factors that still inhibit the development of women. So even within Nigeria, within the policy, you have organizations that are trying to move women from the local into the global, which to me translates into African women being portrayed as local. There are differences, of course, in the local being viewed as a means of empowerment or it being viewed as a means of oppression. My theoretical framework, I'm using a critical race-grounded theory, which essentially argues that previous theories have failed marginalized groups. And one of those theories that I look at is the theory of globalization. And globalization has various meanings for various people. And so I just found that term, because of these various meanings, on one hand, it can be just a neutral thing, right? Globalization is companies and corporations expanding. And on the other hand, especially for critical feminists, it's something that marginalizes women of color. And so because of these different definitions, I am arguing for a new term, right? Localization, which would translate as the relegation of women, in this case, to a local sphere. It can be educational, it can be environmental, it can be economic, it can be cultural, etc. And this localization is both gendered and racialized. The methods, I use a qualitative data collection method. I have interviews, participants, observations, and I use a narrative analysis to analyze my data. Interviews, they're 1 to 2 hours, done in a mixture of the local language, Bokana and English, place of work, or at home. Participants, currently I have 3 women. They're approximately 50 years old. One is the leader of FOA, which is the women's wing of MOSA. Another one was an ex-leader of FOA, and another one is the women's fellowship member at the church. I did participant observations approximately 2 months, attended some FOA meetings and attended some church meetings where one of the women was a member. Data analysis, I use narrative analysis, which essentially means exploring the storylines, trying to understand the setting, characters, conflict, rise in action, resolution. And I use that because I thought that it mapped on nicely to my research questions, where I'm looking at the spaces in which they organize, the issues for which they organize, and their satisfaction. So just a little bit more about the site. Gokana is located in the south-south region of Nigeria. 5% of the people, over 40, have higher than a secondary school education. 86% of the women earn less than their husbands. And this region has the highest report of violence towards women in the country. So summary of my findings, I looked at what spaces, the issues and satisfaction, the spaces in which they organized. I looked at political organizations and religious organizations. The issues for which they cared about, I found that they care about education, leadership training, basic needs, and they want to move beyond their current state in one sense or the other. And satisfaction, between the political and the religious, I found that the people who belong to the religious organization were a little bit more satisfied with the organization's ability to empower them. So I look at 3 women. Agnes is one of the women. She is a leader of the Federation of Ogoni Women, FOA for short. She wants political sovereignty, improved economic opportunities, hospitals, drinking water, but she feels that the impediments to these desires are oil corporations, Nigerian government, the denial of rights, and women's organization leaders who sometimes kind of discriminate against the younger women who are coming into the organization. And then she continues to fight, but currently is not really satisfied with the organization. And so I read the quote at the bottom where she says, "The thing that we're struggling with the most is that you see how we are. There are people who cover us in the forest. They don't allow us to lift up. That is, there are many people who have died because there are no good hospitals. It then makes it so that women, Nigeria does not allow that women should rise. They tie us down." And there is an organizing song that they sing at the FOA meetings, and it translates into Shell Company, they've cheated us, Nigeria has cheated us, Shell Company, they've cheated us, even schools they did not give us, even schools they did not give us, even hospitals they did not give us. When we try to speak up, they kill us. When we try to speak up, they hit us with guns. Yes, me they call, which is, yeah, it's a long story. All right, so my second participant was Alicia. She is an ex-FOA leader. She's left the organization for, I think, almost 10 years now, but when she was part of the organization, she was really active. She wants more leadership opportunities for women, but she feels that there are no leadership education for women, and the group's just too male-dominated. And so she quit the organization, and now she's more involved in her church. And Felicia says, "Men cheat women in the whole thing. If it was educated women, you can't cheat them like that. They would know what they're worth." And she also argues that women should be trained for leadership roles. She felt that the women who were in the leadership roles, or the men, they wanted to hold on to the power, and they didn't allow new people to come in. She says, when you take women to training, they can't keep up. Even in dress-in, inferiority complex affects them. So she sees this dual thing where both men aren't allowing the women to come up, and at the same time, the women who are there are not really able to participate fully because of language barriers and other things that kind of, they're just not able to participate at the level that the men are. So my last participant is Grace. She is a lay preacher and active member of the Church Women's Fellowship. She's also a nursery school teacher. She wants education for herself, family, community, transformative education for women, but she feels that just being a woman in general really really impedes these desires. She talks about widowhood, which I found that was one of the main. I think all of these women were widows as well. Death of children and poverty in community really affect their empowerment. And so she found encouragement from the Women's Fellowship, and she encourages parents of pupils students to educate their children, to try to get them out of, to improve their chances of being successful. And so Grace says, they, the Women's Fellowship, emphasize those women of old who managed and endured and did all they could to become a good mother and a Christian mother. When you see some of these women, you'll not be forced to think about how that woman did it. And then you can say, the way you're doing it, no matter how there's bad things in the world, you will not forget to remember. You'll always be remembering that if these other women were able to do it, then you too will try. So you now learn from how Ruth, one of the women in the Bible, behaved to the mother-in-law. Yes, those instances will then make you strong. She also says, being part of this organization, she was able to ignore and focus on where she was at and where she was going. So she really found empowerment from being part of the Women's Fellowship. All right, discussion of findings. So I found that women organize in local spheres, but they don't view themselves as being local. At the same time, women want to be global in their potential and their reach, but they want to make an impact at the local level, and that's where their heart is. Women use a variety of spaces for empowerment, including the church organization and political organizations. Implications, which is the title of this slide. We need to continue to ponder the relationship between the local and the global, and just the words that we're using, I think, to describe the marginalization of women, which a lot of people have argued for. But I think we do need better terms to really speak to what is happening to women. We can look beyond women's rights, human rights organizations, and discussion about women's empowerment. As I mentioned, it seemed to me that the Women's Fellowship group was a more empowering space than the political organization. And where I want to take the study further is I would like to look at the women immigrants who, also Ogoni, who have lived in the U.S., and to kind of start to think about what does local and global dichotomy mean in a U.S. setting. Thank you.